and welcome to another of my midweek videos. Today I want to talk briefly about the new 40k campaign Games Workshop announced as a surprise on Monday. So this is the Battle for Ogham. Or it might sound like a Warhammer fantasy campaign given the Albion overtones of that name, but no, apparently this is a 40k campaign that will be launched alongside the Leviathan box set in about a week and a half at this point. I just want to talk briefly through a potted history of global 40k campaigns that have been and gone before. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So, first things first, we need to talk about Warhammer 4. I don't know why, quite a few of these seem to have numbers associated with them. Warhammer 4 was the first global Warhammer 40k campaign that was run by Games Workshop, and I'm sure someone's now going to correct me in the comments below. But this was run way back in the heady days of the mid-90s. It was launched in, I think, White Dwarf 192. Jarvis Johnson announced that he wanted to do a global 40k campaign, something that had never been done before, with people writing into him and submitting results from around the world, which he would collate and would determine the fate, somewhat fittingly, of the Imperium versus the Tyranids. This was something that they ran in local stores around the country and around the world. And yeah, Jarvis then collated all of the various battle reports, narrative events, photos, whatever it was that people had sent in to him, and announced the results later on in White Dwarf. It kind of puts things into context that they were very surprised. They got a whopping 450 entries back then, and that was quite a lot. Jarvis had to spend an entire afternoon, bless him, sorting through the various paper battle reports that had been submitted, and then they showcased some of the entries in White Dwarf. The end result of that was a narrow victory for the Imperium. Warhammer 4 was saved, although numerous other planets soon fell to the Tyranid menace. This was followed a few years later by the Third War for Armageddon, another global 40k campaign that was launched, really kind of a follow-on from the story that had first been established during the Second War for Armageddon, which gave us such notable greats as Old Baelai himself, Commissar Yarrick, Captain Tycho of the Blood Angels, and the infamous Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka. It was run during 3rd edition 40k, one of my all-time favourites of 40k, and again, White Dwarf invited people to write into them, this time in a special PO box, to submit results, and in fact they divided the planet of Armageddon up to various locations around the world. I think it's somewhat ironic, the South Pole was given over to the various Baltic states, whereas the Fire Wastes was given over to Australia. In any event, people could submit results from around the world in writing to Games Workshop, and these were eventually collated, again, in the pages of White Dwarf, giving an overall result, which was that Ghazghkull was repulsed, driven off back into space, and the Black Templars gave chase. This also then eventually followed into the Chains of Golgotha novel for Commissar Yarrick, and really kind of expanded on his character background. It was also the first time that Games Workshop released a special codex for one of these narrative campaign events. They released Codex Armageddon, which was a supplement for 3rd Age 40k. Unfortunately, I can't find my copy, or I'd show it to you, but that featured 4 unique army lists. That was the Speed Freaks, the Steel Legion, the Salamanders chapter, and of course the first time we got rules for the Black Templars, well before they got their own full codex. It was followed shortly thereafter, late in 3rd, early in 4th edition, by the 13th Black Crusade, or the Eye of Terror campaign. This was an even more detailed codex supplement than the one before, and whereas before, Warhammer 4 and the Battle for Armageddon had featured the fate of a single planet, Games Workshop announced with Eye of Terror that results that were submitted would dramatically influence the background of 40k going forward. They ended up eating their words a little bit on this one, in particular when Eldrad Ulthuan met an unfortunate and untimely demise that was later retconned. But as they say, all stories with regards to the background in Warhammer are both true and untrue. It's merely a question of who's telling them. In any event, Codex Eye of Terror gave us, against 4 distinct army lists, one of my all-time favourites, the Lost and the Damned. There was the 13th Company of the Space Wolves, the Wolfen. There was a special raiding force for Craftworld Ulthwai, that featured in this, and there was a kind of a precursor to what would become probably one of the best Imperial Guard codexes. There was a Cadian Guard codex list, precursor to the Doctrines list that we would get in this edition of the codex. This was followed then by the Fall of Medusa 5 campaign. There was a couple of Warhammer Fantasy campaigns that came in between the Eye of Terror and Medusa 5. Medusa 5 was released as a White Dwarf supplement. So this gave us no special rules, unlike the Codex Eye of Terror, Codex Armageddon that had come before it. But it gave us some background about this planet we'd never heard of that was apparently doomed to die, was going to be ripped into the forces of chaos or devastated by the Xenos forms unless the Imperium could save it. And what was quite cool was this was the first campaign that allowed you to log your results online. Rather than having to write in, you could go onto a special webpage Games Workshop had set up, log your results on there, and you could even log, updates, battle reports and stuff, stories from your games, which would then be collated into a weekly newsletter that was put out over the course of that summer called Vox Veritas, the voice of truth, essentially from the point of view of an Imperial propagandist that was stuck on Medusa 5, reporting back from the front. I love this idea so much. Like I've mentioned in a previous video, I actually went and converted myself a little gonzo journalist model called Stalker Johnson, who then sat on any boards that was fighting games of Medusa 5 over the course of that summer against my friends, and I then submitted reports from him to Vox Veritas, although unfortunately none of them ever actually made it into the weekly newsletter. So that was the last global campaign that they ran up until they announced this one, just this week, the Battle for Ogham. This is something a little bit different to what they've done before. So this is something unfortunately you're going to have to pay to play. In order to log your results for the Battle of Ogham, you have to buy yourself a copy of the Leviathan box set. Apparently contained within that there'll be a code that will enable you then to log results from games that are fought using the two forces that are contained in the Leviathan box. I don't know if you have to use specifically the armies that are contained in the box, or if you can use any Tyranid models or any Space Marine models you've got lying around. I'm sure we'll get more details as the Leviathan release comes out. I'm looking forward to giving it a go if I can get my hands on a copy of Leviathan, presuming they don't all disappear off the shelves at warp speed. And maybe my lovely wife, the camera grot, can dust off her Tyranids. I can get my Space Marines out. We can have a game and log some results. What's quite cool about this, though, is not only does it affect the history of what will happen in the 40k universe, much like they did with Eye of Terror, much like they did with the Battle for Armageddon. This world we've never heard of, this battle, this planet, apparently a key world, Ogham. They're always key worlds. But the key world of Ogham, its fate is in the balance, and you can influence in 40k lore what happens to it. Yeah, okay. But what is really cool is they've said that whichever faction triumphs on the global results over this fairly narrow window, this 2-week period, that army will get its preview of new models that we haven't seen yet released first. So if you love your Space Marines, get as many games in as you can, log those results, and that will mean that the Space Marine miniatures that we have not seen yet, apparently there's a whole load of new Space Marine models coming, will be previewed first. If on the other hand the Tyranid menace triumphs, then new Tyranid forms we get to see first. I mean, it's a win-win from my point of view because I love both armies. But I think that's a cool real-world stake that they've introduced into this campaign. So, there we go. That's my 2 halfpence worth. I hope you've enjoyed this whistle-stop tour through the history of previous 40k campaigns and my excited gibbering about the Battle of Ogham. I will leave you with that thought. Please join me on Friday for my next full-length video, and I will, as ever, catch you next time. Bye for now.